The world of Death Stranding is often a hostile and lonely one.
First of March, it's clear to me there's something that's uncomforting. Your body has a way with me, but I'm exactly where I wanna be. But I'm a long way from home.
You play as Sam Porter Bridges, delivering cargo across a broken landscape from one city district to another, striving to help those in need and reconnect the United States. As you travel from place to place, districts that you visit consist of warehouses and empty bunkers, all residents dwelling underground. When Sam delivers packages, he is met with holograms rather than real people.
Wait station folks told me all about you. Sam Bridges, with the second expedition, right? The guy expanding the chiral network on his lonesome.
There's a sense of loneliness as Sam travels between these places, and even when Sam does reach these destinations, the player rarely feels at home. These warehouses often feel sterile and lifeless. The landscape between them feels empty and broken. And even the bedroom that Sam uses at the end of the day is just a metal slab for him to sleep on, with only his action figures, accessories, and some cans of Monster Energy to give the room personality. With the exception of 2 characters in the game whose dwellings have a more personal and homey atmosphere, the player never really feels at home in this world, that they even have a place to go home to. There's a moment in Death Stranding when the player is invited to meet with one of the main characters face to face at a cabin in the mountains. As the player makes their way to the cabin, they trudge through a long mountain range, through knee-deep snow, and an increasingly harsh storm. The journey was never meant to be easy for Sam or the player, and that makes the opportunity to see a main character not through a hologram, but face to face in a cabin that will feel more like home than these bunkers and warehouses, all the more comforting. However, as the player trudges through the snow and gets closer to the cabin, the storm grows in intensity, the screen begins to tremor, and the whiteout becomes more disorienting. And then, just when the cabin is within reach, the world is torn apart. Control is ripped from the player. Sam is violently thrust into the unknown, and both Sam and the player enter a place which they don't yet understand. Something which was meant to be a calm from the chaos, a break from the world, becomes a nightmare. I began playing Death Stranding in July of 2020, during one of the craziest years that I can remember. On the news were fires, earthquakes, a pandemic, social uprising, and more. And beyond national and global turmoil, it was a difficult year for my personal family as well. My wife's grandfather had recently passed away. His wife had been diagnosed with COVID, and we were just moving out of our first apartment to go and live with her and adjust to a new way of life. It was during this time that my wife told me that I could take some of my birthday money and buy myself a PlayStation 4, since I was still in the previous console generation. I was able to finally get my hands on one. I was so excited that I immediately found a copy of Death Stranding and decided that it was the first game that I was going to play. To boil Death Stranding down to its most basic, you play as Sam Porter Bridges, a man who is single-handedly tasked with walking across the desolate United States, delivering cargo and supplies to various outposts, and connecting various underground cities together through a system known as the chiral network. In this world through which the players travel, people have taken shelter in bunkers to stay away from the presence of mysterious beings called BTs, and the destructive force of timefall, a new natural phenomena in which rain rapidly ages all that it touches. These new occurrences have driven people underground and separated what was once a united nation into a broken landscape filled with danger, death, and the unknown. Armed with only a few ladders and ropes, the player is sent into this lonely world of mystery to journey toward distant destinations, not knowing what will happen in between. Death Stranding is a game about connecting people in a world that is separated by fear, anger, and death. Sound familiar? And this theme of connecting people, it's written on the box. It's in nearly every review of the game of which I'm aware. It's not as if Hideo Kojima was trying to hide it from me, and yet, as I played the game in the midst of 2020, in the midst of a global pandemic, with social distancing mandates to cut down on face-to-face interaction, I was unprepared for just how much this game would resonate with me. Though Sam Porterbridge's main goal is to help individuals and connect people, he suffers from aphophosphobia, a fear of intimacy, emotional bonds, and being touched by other people. He carries permanent marks from the touch of others on his body, with handprints on his chest and back, which serve as a constant reminder to the player of his condition, of his fear of connection, and other unseen emotional scars. Whether Sam's emotional distant demeanor preceded his condition or was a result of it, it arises in nearly every interaction in which the player sees Sam. Through various interactions, Sam flinches from physical touch. Though I may not suffer from the same fears of touch and attachment as Sam, I've always been an introvert, and been at my most comfortable when I'm able to be by myself or with one or two close friends or family members. I've actively avoided large family gatherings, parties, or get-to-know-you events, which others so readily flock to, because I'm afraid I'll be approached by someone who will want to get to know me, that I'll have to open myself to someone. I skipped freshman orientation for this exact reason. Most of the time, I'm content to watch these events unfold, acting as a lone bystander to observe the interactions of others. The moment inevitably arises, however, that I'm approached by someone who sees me sitting on the sidelines and fears that I feel excluded. I feel ripped from my comfort zone, put on the spot with the feelings that I must improvise and come up with a way to put my internal feelings into words, to tell my personal story in a way that feels genuine and normal. In the heat of the moment, though, my attempts to connect with others often feel rushed, self-centered, and obscure, and have often been met with pauses and stares before an eventual, "Well, it's good to meet you." Even when these moments go smoothly, I often forget to ask questions and get to know the other person, because I can only wait and brace myself for the next question they will ask, anxious that I will have to find another way to justify my existence and put my inner self into the open. And while I wouldn't consider myself an anxious person, I've struggled with interpersonal interaction for as long as I can remember. I always feel a sense of dread in large group settings or when I'm expected to get to know people. Because of this, I would self-isolate and stick to myself, content to stay in my own world where things go according to plan. And, to be honest, I related personally with Sam and his difficulties connecting with others at a deeply emotional level. When I first played Journey in 2013, I lived in a small valley community in Idaho where I felt isolated in the middle of the valley. While my friends would spend time in sports and other extracurricular activities, I spent my time driving about 20 minutes home to make it to my gaming console, to play games and escape this little valley that I felt so stuck in. Because I was on a high schooler's budget, I often stuck to used bargain bin games, or games that had been out for years, selling for only a couple dollars each. This is the type of gaming experience that isn't as conducive to online play, because by the time I made it to a game, the industry had moved on, and a majority of players with it. When I heard reviews of Journey, however, it seemed just different enough that I wanted to give it a try, to experience the journey which so many others had been raving about. As I played through my first experience in one sitting, I remember feeling a bittersweet sense of loneliness. Where most games provided grand vistas, detailed graphics, loud music, and countless side distractions to keep me engaged, Journey's main concern was to turn down the volume, to slow the player down, and allow them to simply experience the beauty of the game world. The beauty which I experienced as I slid down sand dunes, glided through the air, and stopped to take in the symphony of colors and simple design, blew me away and had me giddy as I progressed through the game. This peaceful experience was contrasted with moments of fear and sorrow, the darkness contrasting with the light, culminating in an ending where I was moved emotionally not once, but twice in its final 30 minutes. The experience of the game was beautiful, and it has stuck with me ever since, but it was a bit different in the way that most people experience the game for their first time. My first playthrough of the game was a solo experience, one without any interaction with other living players, and I thought that's how it was supposed to be, a beautiful and harrowing journey for one person to complete alone and contemplate, feeling the weight of the world on their shoulders and completing the cycle destined from the beginning. But that's not how the game was intended to be experienced. Journey was one of the first of its kind to place two anonymous players in the same game world, only able to communicate through melodic chirps, and allow each player to have a sense of companionship on this journey which they were on, to know that no matter where they were, another player was there by their side, enjoying the beauty along with them. It was one of the most celebrated aspects of the game, and yet, for whatever reason, my first playthrough was one without any interactions with another player. While I was used to playing games in a single-player setting, and I often preferred it that way, this time was different. It's not that the journey was any less profound or beautiful as a solo experience, but that there was a tinge of sadness behind every moment of beauty, because the colors, the music, the emotions were all things which I had to experience alone. Beginning my playthrough of Death Stranding was a similar experience. Because I had been so excited to turn on my PlayStation 4 for the first time and see Death Stranding in action, I hadn't taken the time to connect my system to the internet, so I played the first third of the game in single-player offline mode. As a result, the long and slow journeys on foot across the broken and beautiful landscape of the United States felt similar to my first time playing Journey. Beautiful, breathtaking, lonely. As Sam Porter Bridges walked across the landscape in silence, I experienced that same sense of loneliness which I had felt in Journey. Without a doubt, Death Stranding is one of the most visually breathtaking games I've ever played, and the moments when the camera pulls out and low roars contemplative tracks begin to play are among the most moving of experiences which I've ever had in a game. In fact, they gave me a similar sensation of calm reflection and awe that is matched only by a few moments in Journey. Death Stranding is a much longer and more punishing game than Journey, however. Moments of frustration, fear, and anxiety abound and create a backdrop which is much more nuanced and complex, more flawed and human. This complicated backdrop allows these other moments of beauty to shine through like a ray of hope, a moment to catch your breath and truly enjoy the journey that makes up a bulk of the experience. But these stumbles, attacks, encounters with the unknown, and miscalculation lead to moments when I felt that the mission to reconnect the United States, to bring people back together, to endure the long journey and sacrifice myself for the good of others, was too much, that I just couldn't handle that weight resting solely on my shoulders. No matter how much I was able to accomplish, it felt like just a drop in the bucket compared to what lay ahead, to the weight that I would have to carry minutes and hours from now. I'd felt truly alone. And just as with Journey, this meant that those moments of beauty were accompanied by a bittersweet reflection, with the understanding that no matter what I had just accomplished, I would very soon be back to trudging through the journey once again, with no true respite to look forward to. Thankfully, there are moments in the game where Sam is able to interact with others and feel that sense of connection with people. However, as mentioned earlier, these are also met with mixed reception. As a player, I was delighted to see another face, to hear someone talking with Sam, but Sam often felt cold to it all. There was a seeming sense of disconnect, and that inwardly as the player, I craved these interactions, but outwardly, Sam felt the need to be distant. And the more I think about it, this push and pull, this tug of war which Sam faces in his interactions with others, is just how I feel. I have loved ones, and I really do want to get to know people and connect with them, but I often have a fear of doing so. Throughout my time with Death Stranding, I had several moments when I would feel indivisibly connected with Sam Porter Bridges, that I could relate with his emotional journey across the United States. Moments such as this, and this, all felt familiar to me in a way that I can't really explain. The sense of loneliness, the loss of connection, the feeling of helplessness and knowing that what's waiting around the next corner may be more confusing, frustrating, and alienating than all that had come before. The context which surrounded me as I played through Death Stranding is a major reason that I finally sat down to make this video, to finally put my thoughts out there and share my experience with anyone willing to listen, because as I played through Death Stranding in the midst of 2020, in the midst of a pandemic, political turmoil, and endless examples of anger, hatred, and loss of faith around the world, I played through a lonely experience in a hostile world, and yet, I found a spark of hope. One of the most well-known features of Death Stranding, which Kojima himself declared made Death Stranding the first true Strand-type game, is that as the players make their way across the landscape for the first time, they must do so alone, with only their feet and the tools and structures which they carry on their back, to aid their journey through the harsh landscape. When they are able to connect a new outpost to the network, however, the structures of other players become present in the world and provide a support network for the player. As I played through the first third of the game, I found myself constantly paranoid that I would be unprepared, that I would find myself needing that extra ladder or rope, so I loaded Sam's back with as much weight as I could, and often found myself frustrated at the amount of other cargo that I was asked to carry. Weight, loneliness, and despair hid behind every moment of beauty and contemplation, and it felt that to even maintain his own ability to function and make it from day to day, Sam had to overload himself, almost to the breaking point. The job of reconnecting the United States was one that fell squarely on my shoulders, and my shoulders alone. One man, trudging across the continent to connect those who were currently divided. It felt heroic, daunting, rewarding, and exhausting. The things from the people on the other side of those walks are what often kept me going. Responses ranged from messages of thanks, informing me that my efforts had saved lives, to other times when I was kindly told to get lost. And, whether faced with gratitude or anger in return for his sacrifice, rain or shine, Sam Porter Bridges kept walking. The walks were full of silent contemplation, frustration, humor, and a sense of both fear and awe for the world I had not yet explored. Every encounter with the beings of the other side brought me a sense of terror as I saw those inky handprints creep toward me, and an absolute sense of bewilderment as those hands placed their hold on me for the first time and dragged me away toward the horizon, toward the insanity to follow. These moments of facing the harsh realities which awaited me outside of those protected indoor facilities made up over 95% of the experience of Death Stranding, and it made the interactions with any person, whether grateful or not, valuable and memorable. Even though most of these occur not face-to-face but via hologram, I loved them. The burden upon my shoulders and the loneliness of the world made me hungry for human interaction, for the encouraging words of others. And then, a third of the way through the game, I finally connected it to the network. When I connected my PS4 to the internet and turned on Death Stranding once again, the game was an entirely different place. A main road appeared to aid my journey over rivers and rocks and hills. Ladders suddenly appeared in the places that I needed them the most. Generators ended up being in the exact spot that my equipment was about to die. And encouraging signs littered the paths that I walked along, giving smiles, stamina boosts, and general encouragement to let me know that others had made the journey as well, that I was not alone, and that I could make it too. The game completely changed for me. Those moments of loneliness and anxiety, while still present in the game, felt bearable because I knew that there was a support network, that others were in this journey with me, and that just as others were helping me, each piece of equipment that I used in my journey would help the person who came behind me, who would have to climb the same mountain that I did. And the best part of it is that there's a like system holding it all together. Each time the player uses the structure of another, they automatically leave one like, but are given the opportunity to give more if they want to. At first, the player is given a 2-second window to press the like button as much as they can, but then are locked from liking anymore. As the player progresses in the game, however, upgrades are given not only toward equipment, but toward the player's capacity to like the structures of other players. Before I knew it, I was given a full 10 seconds to give likes to other players, and almost no matter what I was doing, I would drop everything and take those full 10 seconds to mash the like button as much as I could. While I would feel a sense of satisfaction in seeing a report of all the players who would use my structures and left me likes while I was offline, I became more concerned with giving likes than receiving them. I wanted to show gratitude for the people who had helped me on my journey, and that gratitude became addictive. Rather than starving for human interaction in each delivery, the influence of other players was felt almost always in the moment that I needed it, and I was able to show my gratitude in return. The initial journey was still one which I had to face alone, but I always did it knowing that my goal was to connect others to the network and to make the world a better place. Instead of just wanting to do good for the characters within the game, I began to always try to do things that I knew would impact other players positively, that would make their experience, their journey, a little easier. It was at this point that the game took me over completely. The game, in every fiber of its design, felt like it was constantly reminding me that life is better with other people, and that the journey is not one that we need to take alone. The challenge can be exciting, the unknown can be alluring, and the adventure can fill a person with an immense sense of satisfaction at the end. But without people waiting for us at the end, the contributions of others along the way, and the ability to perform acts of kindness for others, the journey would have felt worthless. All of the hardship happens for the purpose of bringing yourself and others together into a network of contribution, help, encouragement, and strength. And as a side note, the types of people and occupations represented at various outposts across the map brought a smile to my face as I realized just how much diversity makes our world what it is. Sam comes into contact with an engineer, biologist, doctor, farmer, weather station worker, musician, craftsman, junk dealer, artist, roboticist, mountaineer, photographer, paleontologist, film director, collector, cosplayer, spiritualist, and don't let us forget about other porters along the road as well. These people and their talents are so diverse and widespread that the very people being connected through this network are the ones who make it worth anything. Without the contributions of each person to the body of knowledge which is contained in the network itself, it would be worthless. I feel that we sometimes have a tendency to overlook some occupations or positions in society, but each person is needed in making our system work the way that it does, to make it exactly what it is. This transition in my experience with Death Stranding is mirrored by my second playthrough of Journey nearly a year after my first time playing it. I had told my mom just how much I loved the game, and how much it meant to me, and she listened to me gush about it for nearly half an hour one day. A few months later, I asked my mom if she wanted to try playing it. She politely declined, but she agreed to watch me play it. As I began the game this second time, I was greeted by another player. We shared chirps to communicate with one another, and even without a single word of spoken communication, I felt an immediate connection with this other person, whom I'd never met. And as we went throughout the game, the player that I was with had obviously played the game several other times, so they guided me to various secrets and pickups hidden in the game, which allowed my scarf to get longer, and allowed me to see little parts of the game that I'd never seen before. The sense of bittersweet loneliness, which had accompanied my lonely sojourn the first time through, was instead replaced with a joy-filled romp through the desert, with a guide at my side to help me along the way. As we reached the hardest section of the game, however, my guide disappeared. As I faced the hardest and most somber moment of the journey, I found myself once again alone to face my fate. My heart broken, I began my final ascent toward the mountain. For those who have played Journey, you know that the traveler must die on the mountain. While trudging through the snow, their walking becomes slower and slower, until excruciating seconds pass between each step, until the final moment when the next step never comes, the traveler falls to their knees, and the screen fades to white. Surrounded by figures in white, the traveler is raised from their earthly fate to rise to their ascension above this world, to reach their apotheosis. As I began my ascent, I saw a light at the edge of my screen, an indication that my partner had reappeared by my side, and we rose together. As we arrived again in the place at the tops of the mountains, the music swelling triumphantly as we rose through the clouds and raced toward the light, tears streamed from my eyes, happy to have a person by my side as we reached that glorious moment together. My first time encountering the mountain was emotional for me and left me with a sense of accomplishment, but it was nothing compared to the joy that I felt as my partner and I approached the light together. Though the hardest moment had been one that I had to face alone, in the end, I was with someone else, and that was all that mattered. As I turned from the screen with tears in my eyes, I was all the more glad that I had not only had that experience, but that I had been able to share it with a loved one. My loving mother had sat through the game with me and was patient enough to sit through the entire experience because it mattered to me. I was all the more grateful because that connection which I felt in the game was only a fraction of the connectedness that I felt with my loved ones in my personal life. As I continued to play Death Stranding, and as Sam Porter Bridges became increasingly connected with those around him, I felt a pull to my loved ones, to reflect on all that they had done for me. Death Stranding reminded me just how much weight the people around me have lifted to get me where I am, and just how much work they've done to make my life the way that it is. In all honesty, my journey would mean very little without their part in it. I may be taking this journey for the first time myself, but the groundwork that they laid before me, and the path that they've traveled before me, to allow me to walk faster, safer, and stronger than I would have by myself, makes all the difference. Death Stranding reminded me just how much weight I have to carry to prepare the way for the future of those who will come after me, and how much work I need to do to maintain my connection with people in my life. In 2020, in a time when society is divided by virus, political difference, national borders, religious beliefs, and whatever else may divide us, we need to maintain that connection with our loved ones and do good to others, even if it's hard work. As Sam Porter Bridges walked across the broken United States landscape, I often found myself stopping to pick up packages that others had dropped, because I would hope that another person would do the same for me. Though this would often overload Sam with cargo and make the journey more difficult, I knew that when I reached my destination and delivered that package in behalf of another player, there would be someone on the other side that would be grateful for my sacrifice. And all of this was motivated not by my experience points, not by upgrades or plot points, but by love. Genuine love. The kind of love that pushes people to put themselves through hell and back for the well-being of another. To do whatever it takes to keep themselves connected to others. Love is the force that will keep our world connected. Though the journey is long and difficult, I wouldn't have it any other way. Each day as we walk through life, we stumble, we fall, and we get swept away. And then we get back up, and we take up our load and embark on the journey once again. knowing that our next stumble may not be far off. And even as we struggle, we pause to lift others. And even when we're overloaded and feel like we can hardly take the next step, we take part of someone else's load on our shoulders. And somehow, our own load almost feels lighter. Isn't that amazing? Being in the shoes of Sam Porter Bridges has helped me recognize some of my weaknesses as a person, and genuinely makes me want to be better. I still struggle connecting with others, but at the very least, this little game about delivering packages taught me something about love. Though I can't expect myself suddenly to be better at connecting with others, or suddenly know how to be best friends with everyone I come across, I can try to be better every day. To reach out to others who may be struggling, who may be in a dark place, who may feel crushed under the load which they have to carry, and help them know that they're not alone. Life is so much better when we have someone to share it with, and I want every person to know what that feels like. To feel love, to feel connection, to feel the joy of having someone by their side during the best of times and the worst of times. Death Stranding reminded me that even years down the road, when memories fade, when the curtains are drawn, and when our earthly stories come to a close, the connections we've made and the lives that we've been able to touch are the most important part of this journey. The people we've helped, the lives we've touched, and the memories we'll cherish matter more than any other accomplishments that we may achieve. What matters most to me is my role as a son, as a husband, as a friend, and as a brother. Those connections are what truly matter most, and nobody can take that away from me.
I breathe.